Hello there. Welcome to our Building Executive Function through the Lens of UDL webinar. We will get started in about 1 minute. Give a little bit of grace for those who are still joining us.
And welcome those who are meeting. This is a meeting format, so know that you can be seen on screen by colleagues. We figured this
Yeah.
would be a great format to have some conversation as we go. So feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Of course,
Mhm.
as we get going, we'll prompt that as well. But let us know who you are, where you're from, and even your roles, so we can always customize the content and conversation.
And while more folks are jumping in, I want to welcome everyone as well. We are super excited to have you live. Some folks may decide to use this as a asynchronous resource. The recording link will be available thereafter. So if we're glad you're here as well. So just to make sure you're in the right place, you're at supporting executive function webinar, or actually meeting, from the CCIL Project, California Coalition for Inclusive Learning. We will be sharing how to consider using the UDL guidelines to design learning experiences that support executive function. Should we allow for a couple more to jump in before we start, or are we mostly here?
We're mostly here. We kind of have a slow start with some
Okay.
background information, so we will jump into that. Um, there is a QR code on the screen, and there's also a bit.ly link that will take you to a home-based document that has the link for the slide deck as well. I believe someone will drop that into the chat. So this webinar is brought to you as part of the California Coalition for Inclusive Learning project. So CCIL, as we call it, is a California state grant. It is a partnership between the California Department of Education, CDE, the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence, and the Placer County Office of Education is the lead agency of the grant, working in partnership alongside CAST. There are multiple county offices that are participating intensively in the project. So part of CCIL is Fresno County Superintendent of Schools, Los Angeles County Office of Education, San Joaquin County Office of Education, Santa Clara County Office of Education, Sonoma County Office of Education, as well as we also have two county office geo leads that participate in the CCIL project as well, and that is the Valley to Coast Collaborative and the Capital Central Foothill Area Consortium, or CFAC, geo lead as well. So my name is Becky Canham. I am one of the coordinators working on the CCIL project out of the Placer County Office of Education, and I have my partner Neil here.
Hey everyone, my name is Neil Albero and I'm an implementation specialist at CAS. So joining you from Central Massachusetts, enjoying our time together talking about executive function. I was formerly a math teacher, special education teacher, and instructional coach. So glad to bring some ideas and strategies to our webinar today.
Awesome. All right. So at any point during our session together, please feel free to connect, share out, reflect, ask questions in the chat box. So feel free to introduce yourself now if you have not already done so. And if you need to or have any questions or would like to share anything or hyperlink and share resources, please do so throughout our session. Thank you. Also be sure that the chat is going to everyone. It should say, I believe it is not all panelists because we were in a regular session, but be sure that you are responding or sharing with everyone in the meeting if that is who you would like to be connecting with. So our presenter accessibility promise, as part of CCIL, we are committed to following the principles of universal design for learning and making this presentation and related materials as accessible as possible. A few strategies that we have used today are simple backgrounds with high contrast, real text, Captions are available if you would like to use captions. They should already be turned on and available for you. Digital materials are provided, shortened links, QR codes, and hyperlinks as needed. And then we will have alt text on our images and or videos. Please feel free to share any barriers that we may have missed, and we will revise and redesign. So again, to set up your learning environment to help you best engage in our session together, we have a document that has some information about the webinar. It has the link for the slide deck on it as well, as some links to some resources. So there is a bit.ly, bit.ly/ all capital EFUDL if you would like to access that document and take a moment to pull up the slides if that would be supportive for your learning and engagement today. Right, so our goals for our very fast session together, our participants will be able to better design learning experiences that build executive function, and consider strategies aligned to the UDL guidelines and principles for engagement, representation, and action and expression. So take a moment and think about what might be a personal goal for you today. And feel free to reflect on your intention for learning or drop it in the chat.
And a goal for today can be just to look for one new strategy. Maybe you're looking for language to talk about executive function with the people you work with. So, of course, calling to mind our own personal goals is a great executive function support. So starting with the number one place, creating personal goals helps us to think about the process in reaching those goals.
Oh, great. Thank you, Neil. All right, so we're going to start our time. Before we get into the content and learning together, we want to do a little activity around a scenario that may or may not seem very familiar to you in your life. So here is this scenario. It is a Sunday morning, and you're writing a list of things that need to be done. Some tasks you should do today, and others could probably be put off for another day. Your tasks include grocery shopping and lesson planning for the upcoming week, as you are a classroom teacher. Your school also has a family engagement night scheduled for next month, and you need to plan an activity to share with households. You would also like to do something for yourself by exercising or meditating as you've had a stressful week. It would also be good to have some time together as a family to connect and check in. There are also some chores that need to be done. Organize the coat closet, the car needs an oil change, bathrooms need to be cleaned. And last night, your oldest child just told you that her AP exam is the following week, and she does not feel ready. As you are reviewing your list, you smell smoke and hear the fire alarm in the kitchen where your daughter is cooking breakfast. Take a moment and think about how might you tackle this list of tasks. If you would like to, drop it in the chat or just take some notes. I'll give you a quiet moment to think about how you might tackle this list of tasks. Get some cool strategies. Yep. Oh, Jen Hanks, get out my colored pens. So thinking about how you might tackle it, think about, and let's get a little more specific, what thinking and doing skills might you need to accomplish the tasks in this scenario? What thinking and or doing skills might you need to accomplish the tasks in this scenario? And feel free to drop those in the chat if you would like to share with the whole group. Identify the top priorities and rank the others. Fire, yes, car. Then the next things that must be done. Then the ones I'd like to do. Yeah, that idea of prioritizing. Mhm.
Becky, as you were reading, this is Neil, as you were reading that list, like the flood of emotions came over me about how stressed I am
Mhm.
as you talk through that day and realize like we probably do this every day,
Mhm.
nearly every day as we manage this list of tasks. So I really appreciate this activity and getting us started about kind of that self-reflection piece that we need to take in to say, okay, what are the emotions that are wrapped up in this list? And then how do I move from there?
Exactly. The emotions and the things that need to be done. It all goes together. And how do we think through it, prioritize, make a plan, yeah, and accomplish that plan. All right. Thank you for engaging and going through the scenario with us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Neil so we can start our learning together this afternoon.
Awesome. So Becky, as you click through, we want to start with the next piece, which is like, what do we already know? What do we already know about UDL, Universal Design for Learning, that matters for us today? If you're new to Universal Design for Learning, don't worry about it. You're in the right place. You're going to be able to learn today. But what really connects most about UDL are two core concepts. Number one, that all learners are variable. So the emotions and the ways that we would tackle that list are all different. And we walk the door of our lives with that difference in hand. And the context can enable or disable the learner. So the context in which that we're asked to perform these tasks can be supportive of our executive functions, or they can disable us and create barriers to executive function. UDL is the process of proactive and intentional design to minimize barriers in learning. So what we're going to go through in our session today is being able to think about how do we design an environment that builds all learners' executive functions. So everything that we see or that we share today will really be about whole class, right? Whole class instruction or whole environment, whether it be the digital environment, whether it be the in-person environment. It's not just about one strategy for one student. It's about taking into account executive functions as we design learning. What we're so excited about, pictured on the screen now, are the new UDL Guidelines 3.0. And what the Guidelines 3.0 have shifted and made reference to is that emotion is a huge part of executive function. So if you're a fan of the old guidelines, that's wonderful. And in the bottom right corner, you would have seen a box, executive function under action expression. But that's shifted now. And we've recognized through research, through all the learning sciences, through some time since the late 1980s when the early guidelines came out, that executive function has to do with all three networks of the brain. So we think about engagement in the emotion centers and a build emotional capacity. We think about the strategies we use to help students build and organize knowledge and the strategy development to complete tasks. So you'll see at the bottom of the guidelines, there's a little tab on the left side in gray that says executive functions, which cover all three and really cover all of the UDL guidelines. Just acknowledging through the chat. Thank you, Megan. After the fire check, I'll identify who may be best suited to address each task. So you're not spinning your wheels. I love it. Who can I send to go do the oil change, Megan? Yeah, we need to offload some of this. And that's a perfect transition to our work is we want to offload a lot of the executive function to our students through the support and design of the environment. So let's unpack the term a little bit. What are executive functions? Here's a definition for you. As I read through this definition, call to mind, what word or phrase really resonates for you. Put it into the chat as I'm reading or when we're done kind of going over this. When you think of executive functions, what do you think of mostly, or what's maybe some new terms for you here? Executive functions, EFs, is an umbrella term referring to different higher order cognitive processes necessary to formulate goals, focus and maintain attention, inhibit interference or impulsive or unsuitable responses to tasks, plan and monitor action plans, be flexible in the use of strategies for solving a problem, monitoring and evaluating the outcomes of performed tasks. And that comes from research from Best and Miller in 2010 from the International Review of Research and Developmental Disabilities. and reference there. So what word or phrase is coming out to you? I know we have some special education teachers and administrators on the line here. When you think about what's in IEPs, where do you see which parts of this definition do you see often most addressed? Maybe what's missing? When you plan learning, what do you see that you mostly address? What do you see that might be missing? So pause over the definition for a minute. Jennifer shouting out, we want to see students that are flexible in the use of strategies. Great. How do we model and support that in the classroom environment? Megan saying she addresses attention and impulse control often. Great. But I'm missing that flexible use of strategies. Great. So one person's goals is one person's missing. I love that. And that's what the UDL guidelines can help us to do is consider all those areas. The card thinks more about the organization and inhibiting, interfering, or impulsive responses. But that makes sense. Great. So it's all of these things combined. And that's why we're so thrilled with the UDL Guidelines 3.0 that it goes across the bottom of the guidelines, engagement, representation, action, expression, to think about how the environment supports learning. Awesome. All right, so to support your executive functions and learning, we're gonna separate this list of the functions that we do create in classrooms into two sections. So that's where Becky kind of primed us in our prompt. We have the thinking skills and the doing skills. Again, these processes are something that we go through in the use of our executive functions, but separating them into thinking skills and doing skills helps us to start to break down these individual skills. In our work today, we're going to group them and give you some strategies and some visuals related to each group. So in thinking, we have organization, planning, and time management, self-monitoring, metacognition, working memory. And then in our doing skills, we have impulse control, emotional control and attention, task initiation, self-motivation, and mental flexibility. So from this list, go ahead and jot down, what are you most excited to hear about or see about today? What strategies do you want to come away with or walk away with in kind of what sections? What's jumping out to you? Please let us know in the chat because we'll make sure to call to mind and reflect with you as we go through. Where are the areas that you're most interested?
Neil and Becky, I think they have an opportunity to also unmute if that works for both of you because
Awesome.
we
Yeah,
are in
we're a
the
small
meeting
group, so
format.
feel free to unmute and just let us know if you want to use that as an alternative mode of
For sure. In case
communication.
they're driving, want to keep them safe.
Yeah.
Neil, I'll jump in.
Yeah, go ahead, Brenda.
I am interested in hearing more about task initiation. Educators are grappling with this idea of learner agency since the revision. And so, students being able to just really, they have all the resources in front of them, the lesson has been taught. So, giving them the confidence to just jump in where they think they can begin learning is, on a lot of educators' minds.
Awesome.
Just basically having students get started. So,
Yeah. And Brenda, that's so clearly in the chat as well. We see self-monitoring and impulse control, task initiation. And Elise adds, as a mother, all the doing things, but specifically that mental flexibility, right? So all of these things, as we think about how is the environment designed to support all students to build these skills? What are the types of things that we might see in classrooms? And we're going to go through that in our next sections. All right, the important place I want to start always with the UDL guidelines and especially executive functions is the idea of access. That when we create access, the door to learning, and when that's inviting to every student and is ripe with strategies to minimize barriers, all students' executive functions are supported. So just three quick areas when we think about the UDL guidelines. Ooh, did we skip one? Becky, maybe try going back one unless something got deleted or changed. But yeah, we want to start with engagement, right? So the first UDL guideline, when you look at the guidelines, is welcome interests and identities. So when we engage in culturally relevant content that builds on student strengths and identities, when we welcome students and they feel the environment is safe, you are creating steps to support executive function because impulse control is easier. They're not so afraid or afraid of taking risks in the classroom. They feel their voice is safe. So when we create an environment that welcomes our students' interests and identities, you are supporting executive function. So don't think it's just about one thing or process. Creating that environment that is safe for students to think about themselves and themselves in the context, step one. So awesome. As we move to the second one, don't forget about options for perception. So when a student, maybe with a reading disability, walks into a classroom, struggling reader on grade level, but we've given them access to the curriculum that students can control the pace and rate of instruction. Maybe they have a video, maybe they're able to access the text in ways that work for them through listening or through partner read or whatever it may be. You are supporting executive function because so much of executive function is taking in new information, thinking about new strategies and skills, being flexible to organize that information. But if we can't even get into the text or the lecture pace is way too fast and not organized, then I lose control of being able to manage all that information. So when we provide accessible content, we are supporting executive function. And then finally, focus on access to the interactions. What are the interactions that students are doing? When they can easily navigate the physical and the digital classroom, so much of our content is becoming digital now. But we know that 3 clicks, if it takes more than 3 clicks to get something on a Google Classroom or in Canvas, and we're losing control or organization of where things are, that's going to impact a student's executive functions to be able to complete tasks. So don't forget about that piece. Access is the most important thing. Can all students access the content, the emotional environment, and then the physical environment and digital environment to be able to easily navigate that space? You are supporting executive function when you do that because you offload that cognitive load to be able to handle this really difficult environment to navigate, emotional environment to navigate, and you create the space where they can really manage difficult concepts, multi-step tasks. All of that is so important. So what jumps out? Yeah, good opportunity for, go ahead, Becky.
Oh, thanks, Neil. Just take a moment and think about what connections are you already making to your work? What is it that you're already doing that might be connecting with this idea of access that Neil just walked us through? And again, feel free to respond in the chat or come off of mute if you would like to share out with the whole group.
I would say that the second to provide accessible curriculum that allows students to control pace, rate, etc., and then on the interaction that the students know how to use the assistive and accessible tech, that's focusing on the kids owning those skills. So the first one in terms of engagement, that's what the teacher sets up. The second two, the teacher is providing those options, but at the end of the day, in order for the kids to really demonstrate that executive functioning, they're assessing as well their use, whether it's the right tool, whether it's the right app, whatever it is.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that, Nikar. Exactly. We can provide those things, and we also need to teach into how do we support our learners so that they're able to make those decisions and do that assessment themselves of what works best for them. Yeah. And as we continue our learning together, we'll talk about some of those things that we can do in our classrooms to build executive function, some of the practical pieces. So we're going to start with thinking about some of those thinking skills that Neil highlighted for us. So we're going to start by talking about three of our thinking skills: organization, planning, and time management, and consider how we might support these thinking skills through the principle of engagement, representation, and action and expression. So when we are considering engagement, we can consider how to provide and create clear goals, goals that our learners understand, that are relevant and meaningful to them. We can support our learners by providing groups for check-ins, so supporting that self-assessment and self-monitoring throughout learning. So chunking our learning so that this is ongoing throughout the process. When we think about representation, we can support our learners with organization and planning by using concept maps, graphic organizers, helping them to organize information, not just materials, and support our learners with outlining big ideas and themes, showing them those connections and doing some of that outlining with them. Under the principle of action and expression, we can support our learners to build executive function around organization, planning, and time management by supporting the use of planners or planning templates, outlines that show the complete process so that learners understand each step along the way and what the end product is. And we can support them by aligning tools and resources for the plan. So providing those tools that will help our learners to meet their plan. So our overall question when we're thinking about these thinking skills, how can we make processes clear and explicit so students can learn to organize, plan, and manage their time? So take a moment and think about, are there ways that you're already doing this? Are there processes that you are making clear and explicit so that your learners can organize, plan, and manage their time? And Neil is going to walk us through some examples of these processes. And I see Dr. Jones likes to help students with color coding. Yeah, color coding is a great way to support our learners.
I would add that in addition to providing those tools and modeling that, and especially when it comes to thinking maps, to teach the rule that goes with the tool so that they own it and take it with them, instead of it's like just handing them a bubble map or handing them a Venn diagram and like, this is the thing to do. If they don't own some decision making and understand why they're using the tool, we have to really help them very much.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting that. Yeah, making it very clear what the tool is, what its purpose is, why do we use it, how does it work, and then giving choices in the use of tools so that they really understand and have internalized the use of the tool. Yeah, thank you for highlighting that.
So for each of those UDL boxes, we'll either recommend a video to watch that we just saw, or we will give a strategy or an image. So we're going to start off with kind of that organization. How can we model process in the classroom? Pictured on the screen is a wonderful image of a STEM teacher that I've worked with, and they created the design process for their classroom. And the design process is outlined on a wall. So typically we might see student artifacts or student work or completed student work. But when we're committed to building a system to support executive function, we're going to highlight the process instead of the product. So what you're seeing on the screen is a set of color-coded buttons, and those are recordable buttons. They're so great. You can get them off Amazon for like $20 for a pack, and you can re-record them. So the teacher went through the steps of the design process: ask a question, plan, create, test, revise, reflect. On the button has their voice recorded, explaining what do we do in that step and what are the tools we have in our classroom to do that. Under each button, and this is an emerging practice, so you can see the teacher has practiced the first few steps, because under the buttons, there are the tools that the teacher has practiced. So exactly like Nakar said, we might outline our bubble maps, we might outline our thinking maps or whatever, aligned to each step of the process. What's on the cabinets are hooks. So because this is a STEM classroom, they have a lot of physical objects that they use to build and create. Students have bags, and they move their bags along those hooks as they go through the process. So students are actually monitoring and moving their materials across this process. You can see when we think about access, right? When we mentioned that access, students have the visual to support them. They've got the auditory to support them. If I was able to zoom in closer, you would see each of those cards is written in both English and Spanish to support recording. So once you hear the English version, you also hear the Spanish version on the button. So we really model the process visually, so students can monitor themselves through that process. So that shift from product, hanging up pictures or just displays of what students completed after, to creating the space that is modeling process. And so if you're a high school teacher and you maybe you don't have, that space or that dedicated space, does your digital classroom do the same thing? Does it outline the process, have your voice explaining the steps of the process, and maybe giving models? A lot of times, for example, the writing process, we will give the tools, but not what does a 4 bubble map look like, right? What is a 4 thinking map? When I say 4, like a really complete one that helps you to gather ideas. So just think about, to build executive function for all students, model that process, give them each step in an accessible way, align the tools that you use to that process. Now, this is the interesting thing in this type of process, you might see students going through this 3 or 4 times because they have the process independently. Some students may be only working through it 1 time, and that's okay. We're all in different places. It doesn't even mean more is better. Maybe the person only went through it once might have had a more developed artifact. So whether it's the writing process and students producing writing, whether it is a project, whether it's the STEM process, great model here to support executive function.
I love the focus on the process. We really want to teach the process, not the product. And the process is what our learners can transfer and generalize into other situations. So what a great tool to highlight.
And Michelle's shouting out, this requires independence. Absolutely. And it's taught, right? So the first time I put it up, I don't just say go. It's modeled and taught, right? We're building independence throughout the year. And that's an important piece of executive function, is that you want to stop at each part of the process and teach those explicit expectations in your classroom of what that looks like or in your environment. Because students won't, even if they've seen that design process, they don't know what it looks like in your classroom, in your way, with your materials. So yes, let's build to independence, as Michelle kind of points out. All right. Next thing we kind of mentioned in the strategies was building big ideas, themes, and concepts. So I love when word walls turn into word webs, because they model the connection. And that's where, if students can organize information, not just where does it go, but conceptually, if we organize information, we're supporting them to later use it in an essay, in a poster, or be able to make connections. So the image on the screen is a word wall of a essential question. So really models this connection that executive function needs. How can energy be transferred through an ecosystem? So the visual, the word wall, supports the answer to that high level thinking question that we want students to be able to do. We notice that we've outlined clear vocabulary students need with images, and then we've put together even some graphics that represent the flow in the food chain or the food web. So when we organize information for students in this way, and I love that it's movable, and I love that students are going to be interacting with this. So what are our visuals that we have on our walls? Are students able to interact with those visuals, interact with those words to be able to make meaning? This falls strongly right within the representation guidelines and helps students to organize information. And then our last artifact here is when we think about students, and this is geared maybe towards more of a middle school or high school audience, the unit organizer routine is a resource that we have structured for you, or excuse me, linked for you. And the way that this is used is at the outset of a unit, we might help students just to center themselves around where are we in the learning and where are we going. So at the top of the organizer, you identify the last unit that you just came from, your current unit, and what you're learning next. So if you situate yourself in cell division, for example, in a science classroom, and you know where you came from, we came from just studying cells and we know where we're going, we're going to use this information to think about disease, then you can really center yourself on like, where am I learning, what am I learning, and where are we going with this? The organizer has a unit schedule on the left side where you can outline the key points of the activities you'll be doing throughout the unit. The center has the big ideas and concepts. So there's just a lot here to really center students around what are we doing, why are we doing it, and where are we going with this information. So that time at the beginning of a unit will get students to feel that learning is connected and not an isolated group of activities. So whether it's a math classroom or English classroom, you can apply this to wherever you are. Again, middle school and high school, this is a really great strategy to use.
All right, so we're going to continue with our thinking skills and focus in a little bit around self-monitoring, metacognition, and working memory. So thinking again through our 3 UDL principles: engagement, representation, and action and expression. So how might we support and build these skills in our learners? So under engagement, we can think about providing and supporting our learners with ongoing feedback and the opportunity to self-reflect and have those opportunities planned out intentionally where students may get stuck. Anticipating those times where learners might need to do some self-reflection. They might need to do a little problem solving. And with the goal of them being independent in the future so that they might not need our feedback. They might not need our intentionally planned support. So then thinking about representation, we can provide recordings that explain models. So supporting learners in their perception, that explain exemplars and tools for understanding. We think about action and expression. We want to support our learners with checklists, models, and rubrics that are planned and used throughout learning. These really let the learners know what it is that they need to do along the way. What is it that's required of them? Our learners can't be independent and set goals and make plans if they don't know exactly what the end product is. So checklists are supportive of that, models and rubrics. And supporting learners to become more aware and more able to self-monitor. So thinking about how can we help students monitor their own progress? How can we encourage independence with self-monitoring? And just like last time, Neil is going to share some examples with us.
So I love the example here. We often use this, a thumbs up, thumb sideways, or thumbs down. Thumbs up, I've got it. Thumbs sideways, thumbs down. But I often think like when used at the end of a lesson or at the beginning of a lesson, but not an ongoing learning, I want to transfer this skill to ongoing learning. So students aren't just doing this to kind of match their friends or so that they don't look like they don't understand, but really as an ongoing tool. So again, the strategies that we have in classrooms, you have them. You're doing great things. Just think about, are they getting at what I want them to get at? And that's where this teacher that I worked with took it to another level. So this was a practice that she used often. There's on the right side, the long picture is a picture of those 3 hand motions that are up in the room. But she also had a basket where students had those visuals on a key ring. And as they were working through do math tasks, she started in math to practice this with students, they would have those three symbols on a key ring. And as she monitored the classroom, walking around, probably working with a small group, leaving them to independence, walked around and would look at, not ask, how are you doing? She would look at their self-monitoring tool. So there's three student desks showing. One has the green up, so she would just kind of pass by, say, looks like you're doing okay. Another one had the yellow and another one had the red. So it gave her a signal as well, of where do I need to stop and work with a student? What's my emergency right now? So again, when we're sitting in a large group and we say, do you have this? And we do that quick check-in, we're starting to build that skill, but this teacher took it to another level. So how, as you monitor students' interactions, as they're working through things, do you build their self-monitoring skills? That's where checklists can work. And again, a simple strategy like this. You could have a red cup, a yellow cup, and a green cup that says green, I'm good to go. Yellow, I usually say, is stop in and listen to or see what I'm doing, because I'm wondering if I'm in the right place. And red is like I'm totally stuck. So when we give students that language to monitor themselves, then we're saying it's up to you to keep your pace in that learning. And this tool is a great communication tool. I am an over reflector. So you'll see with Becky and I, we'll like stop after every set of strategies, reflect. What do you notice? What connection do you make? And I think oftentimes reflection again happens only at the end of learning. So we've given you a resource called the 40 reflective questions. And this list of questions I like to practice using before learning, during learning, and after learning. It's when we increase the amount of self-reflection students do, they can tap in. So a before learning question might sound like, what have you done that's similar to this? What has been successful for you in the past? Calling to mind, bringing good emotion to the student, but also bringing in mind their strategies that have been successful. Then I stop during learning often and say, how is learning going for you? What changes should we make? Not just you make, but if the student can say, wow, that lecture was really fast. I wish something was recorded or you could go over that. Great. We can support students with that. So we collectively create this environment where students have access to the materials. And then what did you do well in this learning? What might you try next time? So always at the end of reflection. So you can think about your process of reflection. How often do you do that? Bring in reflection. We want students to self-reflect throughout the process to be able to monitor themselves, but might not know what to ask themselves. So how well do we monitor and bring that self-reflective practice to students so they can develop it independently? We'll ask for some favorites at the end of this last one. When I think about executive functions in a task or an assignment or a lesson, I'll think about where's that stuck moment that students might get into. When might they need a little push from a colleague or from a peer? Even as educators, I think about that as well. Like, when do I need a push from a colleague? I know to reach out for feedback. I want my students to learn to reach out for peer feedback when they do. This comes in just to show you how easy these rubrics can be. This is called a single point rubric, where we put the criteria in the middle, and on the left we have something like a glows and grows. And this comes from a kindergarten classroom. This kindergarten classroom I worked with had students that were reading stories to each other, and they had two criteria. Does my opening hook my reader? Are you excited? And do my details show, don't tell? So don't ask me how this teacher got these kindergartners to do it, but they did it. These kiddos were I was in the classroom when they were using this rubric, but they were reading their stories to each other and they said, are you hooked? And they taught the sentence stem. You did this by, you did this by, and then what they heard in the story. And did I show, don't tell? So again, students can, if we use strategies to get them there, we provide them with the supports. But most importantly, if we want students to self-monitor, think about where in the lesson or in the unit in what they're doing. Again, if we have our middle school and high school teachers on, you might have lengthy units that go 2 or 3 weeks. Plan those peer-to-peer collaborations really strategically so students learn to self-monitor. Where's the point where they might get stuck? Maybe it's after the rough draft. Maybe it's after they plan their research. but give them some criteria, have them peer-to-peer collaborating. All of that reflection and monitoring, feedback helps them to build the skills of self-reflection. And then any collaborative routines as well as that you can use. This one is a great one to get students to see different points of view, unpack plans. When you establish a core set of routines in a classroom, that is, again, an executive function support, but not just routines, typically like where do my pencils go and things like that, but even learning routines. This is an example of a table map where students are asked a provocative question. They write down some ideas for 3 or 4 minutes, then they go around the table and discuss, and then they put all their ideas together in the center to create a visual or a collective understanding. But that set of routines really supports students to be able to connect. So if I'm a middle school teacher, I'm asking my colleagues, what kind of routines do you use to solve problems, to discuss? What does that look like? If I'm a middle school, I want to set a core of like 5 to 7 routines that we constantly use and go through, because that, again, offloads the executive functions of what do I do for the next 10 minutes to discuss, and we really focus on that hard content. So even, again, in an elementary classroom, teach those 5 or 6 learning routines as well as, the routines to manage the classroom. So we'll pause here. Kind of what's jumping out to you from that section about building self-monitoring for students. We connected with feedback. We connected with models and exemplars. We connected with checklist rubrics. What ideas are coming out to you?
Such great examples, Neil. Thank you for sharing those. I really loved the rings. When I was the last school I was at, I had teachers that had so not in, as we move into thinking about emotional capacity, they had the zones of regulations on cards, and they would use paper clips, and throughout the day they would go up and down all day. And it was a really easy way for the teacher to do a visual check-in on learners and kind of where the learners were emotionally, which I've connected with that. The rings with the green, yellow, and red. So thank you for highlighting that.
Nicole, I love to use,
Mhm.
if you're looking for like middle school and high school thinking routines from Project Zero thinking routines. I think if a team were to look through those, find those, because every content area is a little bit different in the way they might want to do things. Those are really great strategies to suggest. And a great PLC or learning is for them to review some of the core ones and talk about what would be the similarities and differences. How might you use this in a math classroom? What might be the different prompts? And then, how might you use this in a science classroom or history classroom? But when we, especially middle schools and high schools, we're all helping each other when we create this set of routines that are clear and predictable for students. Because then again, we focus on, they're not worried about what do I do next? They're thinking about that hard concept. And I can get that as Becky goes into the next section. I can get that link for you.
And thank you, Michelle, for responding in the chat. She wrote about doing reflection with their learners, but definitely need to do it more regularly. When I think back to my classroom, I feel like that was something that I unfortunately tended to cut a lot. And now that I've reflected on it and think about it, it makes me sad that I didn't provide that more regularly or as regularly as I should have. So thank you for highlighting that. We're going to move into some doing skills now. So shifting a little bit away from the thinking skills of executive function and moving into the doing skills. So we're going to start with thinking about impulse control, emotional control, and attention. So thinking about under the principle of engagement, how can we provide self-regulation spaces and routines that are consistently practiced and used throughout learning? So supporting our learners with spaces to physically go and self-regulate and to practice emotional capacity, and then including routines that are regularly practiced throughout learning. So under representation, we want to think about and consider accessible educational materials representing students' lived experiences. We want to ensure that we are supporting our learners' perceptions with diverse perspectives and multiple experiences. Just like Neil said, we want to think about that access piece as a way to build executive function. And under action and expression, we want to think about how can we support our learners by rehearsing the steps in a process, really setting them up to be successful in that process, help students predict barriers that they may experience, and what strategies might they use to counteract that barrier. So involving learners in that anticipation or prediction of barriers. So how can we help students recognize emotions, manage thoughts and behaviors, and empathize with others?
I think those of you who are coaches out there, you can probably take these 4 questions and they help us to shift our attention. And that's what I hope more than anything that our work today does is help you to shift your attention to those different places because we're not sure where the barriers live. Here's just I just want to point out 2 videos. We passed one that is a great example of a routine. It's a gallery walk in a middle school math classroom, a great one. And they use the words claim, evidence, and reasoning in the gallery walk. So you'll hear some ELA context. So when we're talking about some common routines, check that out. This is a great example of self-management, and this is in a pre-K classroom. So definitely check out this video, an amazing video. My favorite line from this video, so definitely go watch it, was students know when they have a problem, it's going to be addressed. And that's just a great message, is that if a problem arises in our classroom, it's not going to be ignored. So this teacher has a problem-solving chart, problem-solving spaces, models it and uses it in process. Just an amazing, amazing model. So check that one out. Teacher I worked with added self-regulation station. So you might have something like this. Just a really simple calm down corner. And this allowed the language of emotions to be part of the language of the classroom. And I think that's more than anything how we start to support this, the impulse control, start to support that emotional regulation is by building knowledge of emotion words that are impacting students. So there's a calm down corner with strategies. And of course, these are modeled, shared, talked about. And then we have some visuals and some tools in that corner. So if there's a space to talk about emotion, then students will know that it's clear to talk about emotion. Too often, when that emotional capacity is not built and talked about, then students are just managing it under the surface. And that's when that can lead to issues. So, of course, having a self-regulation station doesn't guarantee that everyone's going to use it effectively. We need to practice it. We need to monitor it, but the existence of that space in that conversation. One addition that a teacher made to something like that was just putting a box that said, how are you feeling? And the teacher did, sad face, straight face, smiley face. And students would just fill that out and let her know why and put it in the box. And all of a sudden, kids that might have disrupted and there might have been a disruptive moment in the classroom, they would go fill that out, put in the box, and then rejoin the activity because they knew that the teacher was going to address that moment. So put something like that, a little reflection form. That's not, write me a page about how you're feeling, but just something simple where the teacher knows, the student knows that I'm going to go pull that out of the box later and I'll check in with you. You don't have to tell me now if it's something that you can manage by yourself. So just really nice addition to a typical self-regulation station we might see.
Awesome. Thank you, Neil. So thinking about our next or last doing skills of task initiation, self-motivation, and mental flexibility. Again, thinking through the 3 UDL principles. So under engagement, providing choice so students can find relevance, providing activities that engage learners and that our learners perceive different levels of challenge, really engaging our learners with the level of challenge, with things that they find relevant and meaningful to them. Again, thinking about that access piece as well. When we think about representation, how can we connect to background knowledge, provide concrete examples and transfers that matter? So thinking about generalization and transference that matters. We want learning to be authentic. And then under action and expression, thinking about providing and practicing using multiple scaffolds and tools that support students to build independence. That's the goal with all of these suggestions, is to support learners to be independent, to build those executive functions.
Awesome. So one of the tools that we have for you is a learning plan that helps to think through a process with students. I love the learning plan because it starts with what will we accomplish and why is it important? That's the relevance piece. So when we talk with a lot of middle school and high school teachers, and they're like, students are really falling behind on their project. And I'll say, well, okay, what are they trying to accomplish and why is it important? And when we can't answer that why is it important question, it may not be an executive function issue. The kid can follow timelines. They just don't care. So how do we do things that really are relevant for students? It's much easier to initiate that task initiation, when learning is connected, learning is meaningful. And it doesn't always mean that in UDL, if you're knowledgeable with UDL, sometimes we feel like multiple assessments or different ways to assess understanding. That's great, but it doesn't always have to be the assessment. The act of making that artifact, making that video, making the poster, or something again more relevant. Maybe they're creating a survey based upon themes of a text. Maybe they're going out and interviewing a family member related to a story that they read or a theme of a story. That doesn't always have to be the final assessment, right? If you want your traditional assessment, your essay, let the creation be part of the way that students connect and process the information. They're going to do better on your assessment because of it, because they're going to have learned about the content. So that's one kind of thing I want to especially dispel with UDL, is all that making and all those options for creating don't always have to be what you pin the final assessment or grade on. Maybe it's 25% of the grade and then 75% is a traditional essay, but students are going to be better on the essay because they processed it in a way that worked well. So if you can answer, why is this important? What will the end goal reach like? The clearer we make that end goal, that's why multiple models are important. Don't just show the model of one way to do it, but can you even get started? Like the initial pieces of a model of several different ways. I was in a classroom where the teacher offered you could do a movie poster or a cereal box. They held up the cereal box. 24 out of 25 kids chose the cereal box because they couldn't visualize what is a movie poster and why would I do it. So even if you just start creating the model or show a quick example of what it could be, you open up students to taking on some of those different challenges. And I know we're kind of at our end, but take a look at again some additional videos. We'll be on till for another 30 minutes for just Q&A if we want to tidy things up or to kind of discuss anything. But I think we're going to turn it over to Brenda for our closing.
Yes, so if you can go to slide, keep going. All right, so thank you, Neil and Becky. That was very engaging webinar. So I would love if you guys can attend our upcoming webinar. We're talking about CTE and UDL, and it's going to be presented Don, which is someone within CAS. He'll be presenting on this topic. He's our expert within CAS on CTE and UDL. And then in terms of resources that follow, next slide, please. The top tips for this webinar has been linked to the home base. So the link that you followed when the webinar started, the top tips are there. Following this webinar, we'll provide the webinar link as well as the Got a Minute will be posted to the CCIL website, but at least for now, you can get started with top tips. And then lastly, for those of you who aren't staying with us for Q&A, if you can provide us some feedback, we, as a result of the feedback we received, we actually made a decision to extend on this webinar so that we can have Q&A. So that is something we've done as a result of getting your feedback. So we really love your feedback because it helps us to do our job better. So if you can follow the link or the QR code and provide us any feedback that would be helpful to you as we continue on through this series of webinars. So that is it. If you plan to stay for Q&A, just stay on, and we're going to, after we give folks a moment to fill out the survey, begin taking questions either through the chat, or you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
And maybe, Brenda, we can stop the recording for the Q&A. I'm just wondering.
Oh, yes.
That
So
might help people discuss as
should
well.
be stopping the recording, hopefully.